Kim Dhillon. I'm the winner of this year's Bliss Carman Prize for Poetry, and I'm going to read my poem Seeker for you, and then I'm going to speak a bit more about it. Before I do, I'd like to thank Thin Air for hosting me here. I'm sorry not to be in Winnipeg with everyone in person, as I'm sure everyone is, but I'm grateful to be able to speak with you here. I'd like to thank Prairie Fire for providing the opportunity and for publishing my poem, and to Jennifer Still, who was the judge of the prize this year, who provided insightful and generous comments. Thank you also to the Banff Centre for the Arts, who sponsored the residency as part of the prize, which I look forward to taking when COVID-19 is over, as well as McNally Robinson Bookstores, who generously supported the prize. Thank you all for this support. I am grateful. It's also important to note that I'm speaking from the unceded lands of the traditionally Sechathan-speaking peoples on the Saanich Peninsula of southern Vancouver Island, specifically between the Pakwachin and Sartlip reserves on the peninsula. This is where I've lived, uninvited on this land for the last 3 years, and though it's not where I'm from. And the question of where one is from, how you identify with communities that you may or may not be a part of, with family and with yourself, are part of what this poem is about. Seeker. I have been looking for you, Seeker, sleeping there like a language long not spoken, like the child speakers learning a sleeping language. Awakening, I hear a poet talking on the radio. The poet on the radio says she speaks for sick women, giving a voice to those where there was not. Giving a voice, she pronounces it sick, like sick. When I diversify my bios or funding apps, I say seek, like seek. My father was seek, like seek. Now he prays in a church. I have been saying it wrong, seeking my name. The only Indian thing about me, my name, Rajput from the Punjab, which I pronounce poon, like poon. It's not poon, but pan, says the poet. Short A, pan, jab, a finger in the chest. A finger pointing in the chest, sick, pan, jab, seeker. I have been looking for you. So Seeker is my first poem to be published in print and only my third poem to be published at all. Saying that, I've written for more than 15 years, but as an art theorist, writing about language and visual art. And it's only since finishing my PhD and wanting to seek out forms of writing where I can continue to push the limits of language that I've begun to write poetry. So I think it's important to say that I'm not sort of trained formally as a poet, but very much self-taught. And I've also realized that in writing about visual art, that it was always someone else's work that I was writing about, someone else's ideas that I was writing about, and in a way perhaps hiding behind. And so poetry has pushed me to look further and look closer at my own experience. And I wrote this poem last autumn and sent it off without anyone having read it, without having read it aloud to anyone. And so it certainly came as a shock when Prairie Fire called and told me that I had won. So Seeker is a poem about language. It's about mixed raceness and the self. It's about belonging and dislocation. I am an immigrant to Canada. I'm a mixed race settler, and I'm also the daughter of someone who migrated as an infant himself in the partition of India and Pakistan and then grew up in England. So I'm very much the child of the British Empire, simultaneously colonized in my family and complicit in colonization. And the fact that I speak English as a first language, that I live here in Canada, is all a result of colonization, but it's something I'm implicated into. So how do I reconcile that? That's the mixed race experience for me, asking where I fit. Where do I fit in terms of identity? Where do I fit in language? I'm an Indian who's never been to India, And there's a lot of play on language in this poem, the idea of a mother tongue. The poem speaker is questioning, where does one fit in language and in community? I grew up in a small town in British Columbia, one of a handful of non-white kids in the 80s in this small town. And when teachers would find out I was Indian, there was this confusion of whether I was Indigenous or Indian, and I hadn't even been to India. And so that's a common experience of mixed raceness, I find, this experience of being othered by both the minority and the main. So hearing this poet on the radio, it was on the CBC, though I can't recall which program, say she spoke for Sikh women inspired the poem. My dad was born a Sikh, though he hasn't practiced the religion since childhood, and I think since moving to England in the early 1950s. But my grandmother went to her local temple until she died. And the poet said it differently to how I had said it until then. So the speaker has this confusion that the speaker couldn't even get right, that I couldn't even get right my name or my origin. A friend who's also mixed race Indian said that she was told that the word had shifted. Maybe it was anglicized because Sikh, S-I-C-K, sounded negative in English. Sikh sounded like sick. It sounded negative in English. So there's these slippages in language, in meaning, that are meant to confuse the reader or listener the same way that they confuse the speaker. So that's a bit about Seeker. Thank you for listening. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the poem and the structure and influences across memoir and poetry and visual art over in the second video, if you want to join me there. And otherwise, thank you so much and enjoy the festival.